This is Doleo, an original thriller fiction podcast presented in serialized format, a chapter at a time. Written by Jared Canton, narrated by Joshua Canton, a SteadyChaos production, 2019. Previously on Doleo, Grubbs burst on the scene as the supposed solution to Ryder's bully problem. Will Grubbs' unorthodox training regimen empower Ryder to solve his problem, or embolden him to create a wildly more dangerous one? Episode 4. Consequences. It took only 4 months, 3 days, and 19 hours before I was forced to put my training into action outside Denton Elementary School. My breath beat back against my face in the breeze, a foggy mist that let me know the temperature was particularly cold that day. The red noses of Brett's clan also indicated the temperature, as did the slowly falling snowflakes that dusted the crushed gravel beneath my feet, peppering the landscape like salt grains on a granite countertop. Brett barked at me as I gazed towards the ground. I had drawn his ire just moments earlier. He had been parading down the hallway, slapping possessions out of the hands of unsuspecting social outcasts, when I had challenged him as a distraction to free a litany of potential victims from his aggressions. I was now questioning that decision. "I can't even feel pain, and you're still a pain in the butt," I'd said to the oohs and ahs of the hallway's occupants. Now, standing before him, awaiting judgment, I nervously fidgeted. With the toe of my boot, I brushed the snow clear from a small area of crushed stone. Normally in these instances, I wouldn't be particularly nervous, as I knew how it would go. I'd remain calm and still, then I'd absorb punches, kicks, and slaps. I'd eventually go to the ground without pain. Then there would be blood, and my assailants would leave, or there would be no blood, and they would stay there until there was. But this time, I was nervous. Not that I would be hurt, but that my newfound empowerment would be dashed, and I'd again be forced to concede helplessness. I was decent size for my age, neither thin nor fat, nor muscular, just solidly there. I was, however, small in comparison to 12 and 13-year-olds, especially those already displaying the elusive transformation boys yearn for called puberty. Brett, the obvious leader of this clan of misfits, sported the thickest burgeoning mustache of them all. He also demonstrated the most consistent violent tendencies. Typically, in these bullying sessions, his comrades participated little beyond periodic musings from behind Brett as he delivered his blows. "I'm talking to you, freak!" Brett barked again. His words pulled my attention from the ground upwards to his fat, red-nosed face. "Why do you call me that? Why do you even care?" I asked. While my self-confidence would be best served raining sharp blows down upon his head, my favor with Dad and freedom were best preserved by evading said combat peacefully. "You going skiing?" One of the boys I didn't know shot out from the safety of the group. I reached up and fixed my goggles, my self-consciousness and discomfort manifesting in restless action. Truthfully, I had probably outgrown my need for them. By this age, I knew well enough to not jab dangerously at my eyes. Eye protection was far more necessary for babies and younger CIPA sufferers still coming to grips with the dangers of their illness. But I had grown to understand the threats I posed to my more delicate features and organs. At home, or out with Dad, I no longer wore the goggles. However, at school, where everyone knew what I had, what I was, a pair of tinted goggles acted like a day shade between me and the cruel light of social interaction. Behind them, I could see, but not be seen. I didn't say anything, just calmly held my ground. Brett took a hard step towards me, and my arms rose into now instinctive defensive positions, my left high, protecting my face, my right lower, protecting my vital organs, as Grubbs had put it. The boys cackled wildly at my reaction, and Brett took an exaggerated step back, feigning fear. "He's gonna Miyagi me!" Brett's head turned to face the 3 howling morons behind him. "Did that freak grow a spine?" "I guess this time we'll really find out if you can be hurt." With that, Brett lunged towards me, his bald right fist raised high and well behind his ear. It was, as Grubbs had told me, the way any untrained attacker will throw his first punch at you. Large, long, slow, stupid. I sidestepped hard to the right and let my left leg drag along the gravel. His attack missed its mark by almost 2 feet, and his force sent him staggering like a toddler unsure of his own legs. His shin slammed into my leg, and he tumbled to the snow-dusted gravel. Not more than a second after impacting the ground, Brett sprang to his feet, brushing his coat off furiously with the flats of his palms. His cheeks, from the weather, or embarrassment, flamed red to match his bulbous nose. He swiped at the thin mustache above his upper lip, clearing it of the snow that had sprung to his face upon his abrupt landing. He modified his next attack, but it produced an equally predictable effort. Again, consistent with Grubb's advice, he tried to leverage his size advantage and employ a tactic to enable punching an elusive target. Grubbs had advised, "When you prove that you can't be hit by traditional strikes, the attacker will try to grapple you. This requires the attacker to close ground, and nobody likes getting hit in the face. If he approaches head down, this is to your advantage. Guide him past, or break his nose." Again, his advice was alarmingly on point. Like a middle linebacker, Brett threw his head and shoulders down, and charged as if he were trying to pierce his head straight through my midsection. I stepped back, delaying his point of impact, the timing of which robbed the attack of any semblance of balance. He leaned further forward as he staggered, and with a solid push to the back of his head, his face drove firmly into the gravel. When he raised it, snow and blood mixed to form a pink-hued slush across his chin. He snarled and found a way to his feet again, only this time slowly, with clear indications of self-doubt. His eyes tightened into slits, and his lips flexed into a jagged little circle. He let out a growl, and he charged again, only this time, before I could react, 2 arms wrapped around me from the back, locking in front of me with interlocking gloves. Brett's right hand smashed across my face, launching my head hard to the right before my neck recoiled, throwing my head forward. The arms from behind released me, and I fell to all fours on the ground. Blood and spit dangled from my lower lip. It stretched and then puddled into the snow. I pulled my boot forward and pushed up, elevating my body upright again. I was panting slightly now from fatigue and nerves, and I rotated and retreated a few steps back like a cornered animal trying to align its attackers on one defensible side. The boy who grabbed me, I think his name was Andrew, stood shoulder to shoulder with Brett now. The other 2 stooges stood a step behind them. "You had enough, freak?" Brett asked, a peculiar question based on the events to this point. I used my sleeve to wipe the blood from my mouth and considered the consequences of my answer. If I answered no, then Brett would have no choice but to defend his pride in front of his pack. He would attack and attack until I didn't get up or begged for mercy. On top of that, the further this went, the more likely my dad was to imprison me indefinitely. He hadn't helped me learn to defend myself to engage in or escalate conflict. He had done so to equip me to avoid it. I nodded. Pride bubbled at the back of my throat, but I forced it down with a hard swallow. "I can't hear you." Brett elbowed his friend to his right as a smile emerged above his bloodied chin. "Speak, retard." I hated that word. While my newfound confidence had empowered me, it was just as likely to put me at risk, than serve me well in the long run. Who's to say that a 3rd kid wouldn't jump in, or a 4th? I had learned an important lesson. Odds are everything. I contemplated my next move, and decided to give reason a try. I reached for my waistline and pulled up my shirt to reveal the scar on my abdomen. Over the years it had faded, but it was no less impressive than it had been. "What's that?" Brett asked, temporarily sidetracked. "When I was 4, I stabbed myself with my mom's scissors." "You don't have a mom, you liar," Andrew shouted. It was common knowledge that I had been raised by a man that wasn't very popular in this town. Before I came into his life, Dad had sued a local health provider after they missed his wife's breast cancer diagnosis on 3 mammograms during the first 2 years of her illness. By the time they did find it, it had been too late. Dad won a medical malpractice judgment and subsequently donated 2/3 of his award to breast cancer research. The suit bankrupted the provider, cost the town 14 of its higher-paying jobs, and also came at a steep cost to Dad's reputation. I did have a mom, and she found me bleeding from this. And why did I do that? Because I didn't know any better. I couldn't feel it. My body just doesn't talk to me the way yours do. I hoped if I could explain my condition, prove it, that maybe they would just let me be. My theory proved naive. "Bullshit," Brett spat. "You don't have a mom, and you live with that rich asshole that cost my mom her job." "My dad's not an asshole." I could feel the tears coming. My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't make them stop. Why wouldn't they stop? I shook them vigorously, but to no avail. "That's not what everyone else says," Brett shrugged arrogantly. "They say he let his wife die so he could sit at home and count his money." The shaking in my hands reverberated up through my body now with an intense prickling sensation. To this day, I remember the onset of a sweeping loss of thought. There was a void, no consideration of consequences or danger, just anger. It was as if my brain had conceded control to my body and just decided to let unmitigated instinct happen. I charged. He raised his hands to defend his face, and I rained countless consecutive blows through his guard. His head bobbed back and forth like a speed bag as my punches met their mark one after another. He fell to the ground, and I mounted his chest, still raining blows down until his 3 cronies tackled me off him into the snow. 2 of them grabbed me by the elbows, and the 3rd from behind by the collar of my shirt. I struggled to free myself like a snared animal. As I thrashed my head to the side, I saw Brett roll over, bleeding in the snow. A wave of satisfaction flowed over me. Vindication. Revenge. It felt good. A sting of guilt hit me, but it washed under a still boiling fury. I freed myself from the grasp of the 3 older boys, and 2 staggered to my front, slipping awkwardly on a patch of snow-dusted ice. Suddenly, at the back of my neck, I felt a gentle touch. It was the softest of impacts, if it even was an impact, and I flung my head reflexively to avoid it. It was the kind of sudden, instant motion one makes upon feeling a bee land upon their arm. Immediately, following the gentle touch, a balled fist flew past my head and crossed into my peripheral vision. I spun away, pivoted to see Andrew follow his missed punch. Kinetic energy propelled him, and he stumbled to the ground. My brain powered back on, and a flood of delayed thoughts rushed back to my consciousness. Did I just feel a punch that didn't even hit me? I stood dumbfounded. The 4 bullies littered the scene, their bodies twisted and contorted, scattered across the gravel yard. What in the absolute hell, boys? I found myself staring into the serious but bewildered eyes of Principal Saunders. He beat up Brett, one of the boys blurted upon arriving in the principal's office. I did not. A self-defense reflex, I guess, because honestly, I had. Boys, what's going on here? The principal's hand searched out and found a comfortable place on his hips. They carved into his suit jacket and presented an aura of displeased authority. He punched Brett, and now Brett's bleeding in the side lot, another boy accused. I didn't bother to turn to see which it was. Judy, get the nurse and go see Brett. He pulled his hands away from his hips long enough to point in the secretary's direction. She stood and rushed out the office door with an urgency that I found unnecessary. He had a cut on his lip, not a missing limb. This isn't like you, Ryder, Principal Saunders said. Boys, take a seat over there. He gestured to a row of 4 chairs across from the entrance of the large office. I exchanged heated glances with Brett's 3 stooges before we found our seats. Ryder, what happened? I fought back. Stay right here, I'm going to go call your father. He pointed accusatorially at me and retreated into his office. It wasn't more than a minute later when the door opposite my seat burst open to show the concerned faces of the secretary and school nurse. The secretary, a large woman, 40s, with the smooth skin of a 20-year-old, panted as if she had run the full 100 yards to the lot and back in record time. The nurse, younger, and faculty selection number 1 for the affection of boys throughout the school, showed slightly less concern as she crossed the same threshold into the room. The nurse gave me a wink as she passed. She knew well of my condition and the problems it had caused for me since I came to this school. The 2 hurried into the principal's office behind the desk to my far right. As the secretary closed the door behind them, I observed their shadows through the frosted glass window. The larger shadow burst into an exuberant hand demonstration. "He's gone!" were the first words to escape the office. The remainder of the conversation was indecipherable, muffled whispers. The next time the door across from us had opened, it was not a faculty member that had entered. It was my dad. My heart momentarily sank. The moment of truth had arrived, a time for reckoning. My head dropped, and my chin touched the upper part of my chest. I waited for the "why, how could yous, and what were you thinkings?" But they didn't come. "Are you okay?" Dad said as he covered the 12 feet across the room in 3 long strides. His face was beet red, and his eyes were glossed over with a thin, glazed layer of wetness. Not tears, but worry, concern. When he reached me, his hands found my shoulders. They made their way up to my head, and he pulled off my goggles. He inspected me for wounds. His strong hands turned my head to one side, and then the other. He looked into my eyes. "Do you feel any sensation? Did you get hit anywhere?" "My shin is all," I said as I pulled up the fabric covering the leg that I had used to send Brett flailing to the ground earlier. A small purple bruise was my only token of remembrance, the turning point when I stopped being a victim, if only for the briefest of moments. "Thank God," Dad said as he turned to face the 3 boys at my right. Their eyes shot pure venom back towards him, and he returned it in a way that I'd never quite seen him look at anyone. It was fascinating how kids could hate my dad so fiercely, based on only what their parents had said, when many of those same parents had never even met him before. He turned back to face me. "What happened?" "Brett. He tried to beat me up again." "Tried?" Dad blurted. A look of surprise burst onto his face. "I beat him up." The smallest crack of a smile yanked at the corners of my mouth, but I managed to preserve my stoicism through the guilty pride flooding my body. I awaited Dad's reaction before letting him see it. He turned to look at the boys again. They said nothing, this time averting their eyes from his in a cold display that authenticated my story. Their mighty leader had been toppled by a younger, smaller, special needs kid that wore ski goggles to school. The concern on Dad's face washed away. replaced by a cool calmness. He looked into my eyes. His face was stone solid. Not a smile, not a wrinkle, just an absent, emotionless, human canvas. He angled his face away from the three boys, and a smile I had only seen him don while holding a picture of his lost love split his face in half. "We'll discuss this further when we get home, young man." His right eye pinched shut, and right then I knew he was proud. The principal's door opened, and the three faculty members emerged. The nurse strutted towards me, and a small knot rose in my throat. "Are you hurt?" she asked, as she knelt before me. "Are any of you hurt?" The four of us collectively shook our heads. 4 young faces all tinted pink in her presence. "Good." She stood and retreated back towards the front desk to the far right, near the entrance to the principal's office. She stood with the principal and secretary. "Mr. Daniels," the principal started, before releasing an exhale, "there was a fight between your son, these 3 boys, and Brett." 4 on 1 again?" Dad asked. "Please, Mr. Daniels." The principal held both of his hands up in what I could only interpret as a surrender. "When will this stop?" Dad moved hard towards the principal until he abutted the desk that divided the two. The next thing I heard was the door across the office swing back into the wall. The glass at its center detached from the frame, shattered against, then deflected off the wall, cascading a shower of glass particles. Standing in the open door was Brett, his face bloodied, tears streaming, dragging the blood down his neck like a medieval war paint. My eyes darted to the right as Principal Saunders reached forward, and as if in slow motion, threw both hands onto the desk, hurled it, and then threw his body towards Brett. My gaze reverted to Brett, and a reflexive glimmer of light extending up from his knee. An earth-shattering boom triggered my hands to my ears as a red mist erupted from Principal Saunders' back. The force thrust his body into Dad. Blood painted them both head to waist as they crumpled under the force of Principal Saunders' deadened body. My eyes flew back to Brett as he cocked the shotgun and raised it again towards Principal Saunders and my dad, both helplessly lying in a pool of blood. "No!" I yelled as I instinctively sprang into directionless, panicked action. To my right, I caught the nurse emerging from behind the desk she and the secretary had ducked behind. Brett spotted me as I awkwardly closed on him, and he swung the shotgun clumsily from his hip. He fired, and I felt a pounding pressure against my right shoulder. It spun me backwards, reeling into a pirouette, and I crashed to the ground several feet short of Brett. I placed my palms flat on the ground as blood poured from my right shoulder down my arm, layering my right hand. My eyes leveled with his, and he cocked the gun again. He lowered the barrel at the nurse as she retreated to cover. I pulled myself up from a crouch and ran towards Brett as Dad squirmed free from Principal Saunders' lifeless body onto his backside. Dad scurried backwards on his hands and knees and yelled, "No, Ryder!" I stumbled forward 3 steps and fell into Brett, disrupting his arms and fired. We fell to the ground and the gun slid out into the hallway. As we wrestled, bodies whirled past me. "Stop this, please!" I heard a woman's voice shout from behind me. I rolled free of Brett onto the tile floor, out of breath, exhausted. My head was spinning and I fought to keep my eyes open. I looked up to see the nurse holding the gun. Relief washed over my body and I dropped my head to the floor. Slowly, I rolled to my back and the nurse rushed to my side. I lifted my head high enough to look over the tips of my shoes. Located squarely between those toes was Dad, 5 yards back, perched on the office rug, both hands clenched desperately at his midsection. A river of blood bubbled through his fingers. He smiled faintly before his eyes squeezed shut and his head crashed back into the wall. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed Doleo, please come back for future episodes arriving at regular intervals, and subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast application. Please visit the SteadyChaos Productions YouTube page and subscribe for more content from our production team.